Graeme Shugg lives in Adelaide, Australia and attends the Christadelphian Church, or ecclesia that meets at Salisbury. Graeme is the author of a book published by the Christadelphian Scripture Study Service based on the life of King Asa. The book jacket reads as follows. It was a time of political upheaval and savage warfare. Judah and Israel were in a state of constant enmity, and the people on both sides of the border were suffering. Into this tragic situation, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, intervened to ensure that his lamp would continue to shine in Jerusalem. Good King Asa was raised up as the healer of his nation, the first great reformer who would turn the kingdom of Judah back to their God. As the prophet Azariah, the son of Oded, said to Asa and his victorious army after the defeat of the greatest invading army in Jewish history, Yahweh is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But would Asa and his people continue to trust in Yahweh, the God of their fathers? This book will hopefully shed some light on his life and his choices, leaving us with some powerful lessons to consider. This full-colour book includes tables, maps and illustrations throughout and a comprehensive scriptural quotations index. Graeme joins us on Wilderness Conversations. Graeme, thanks very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
Oh, pleasure, Steve. Thank you so much for asking me. Yeah, it's a real joy.
Just before we get into the book, which we want to talk about, tell us a little bit about yourself and what's your background and where did you find the gospel?
Yeah, so my mum and dad were both Christadelphians from Melbourne. My dad's parents weren't, but my mum was a Galbraith, so that goes a long way back over there. I was born in Loxton after they moved across from Melbourne. Grew up in a Christadelphian family. I have to say that as a young person, I was far more interested in sport. You might remember playing cricket in the driveway of your grandpa's place at Apollo Bay with me and Simon and a few of the other Dodson cousins and stuff. So we had a bit of fun. I used to enjoy that. But I think Mum and Dad saw that I was needing a little bit of guidance. And started getting me up to some, junior youth groups and things in Adelaide. And then we moved up there when I was 15. And very quickly I suddenly realized that actually studying the Bible was cool. It was fun. It was interesting. It was exciting. Had some wonderful young brothers around my age and a bit older that I won't name them, that'd be embarrassing probably. But we just had a great group at Teacher Gully where we were and really grew up together, thriving in the Word and talking about it, studying it, reading, works by Brother Thomas and Brother Roberts and others and just talking about the Word of God and getting excited about it. It was really encouraging for that. So I got into teaching. Was a teacher in basically a whole range of different classes from reception or foundation through to year 12, secondary English and history. But I settled in, the sort of year 5, 6, 7 range as being where I really enjoyed teaching and sort of taught in there for a while. And then I realized that I probably wasn't going to retire in the classroom and I'd better start doing some other stuff. So I did extra training and I learnt Spanish for a while and went over to Mexico and studied for a little while. And
oh wow!
But I just couldn't keep it up. Unfortunately, I taught it for a couple of years, and then when I came back to the city after being in the country as a teacher, I sort of got into leadership.
What, mentoring or teaching?
Mainly in behaviour management support.
Okay.
Working with staff to work with families, kids with disability, Indigenous background kids, and worked at some really interesting schools in the government system. Just amazing experiences of kids that were troubled. That was a great experience, and so I did that for about 10 years. just happened to get a phone call from Andrew Johns at Heritage saying, "Oh, we've got this position. Don't know whether you'd be interested. I know you're probably overqualified, but would you like to do it?" And I said, "Look, I'm only looking for part-time." And he said, "No, this we could do that." So yeah, ended up at Heritage and yeah, worked there with Andrew. And then of course when Justin Robertson came in, enjoyed time with Justin and yeah, finished up there at the end of 21 and retired. So yeah, I'm a retired educationalist, if you like.
How long were you at Heritage?
Yeah, 10 years.
Right.
Oh, just under 10 years. Yeah, 9 years. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a great experience. Just so different from the government schools.
Yeah.
Kids who are there who want to learn.
Mm.
Parents who are very invested, obviously, in that. That can create its own difficulties sometimes, with expectations and things like that. But boy, what an experience to see kids who are learning, who are enjoying learning, who are surrounded by an ethos of morality and of godliness and focused on the coming kingdom and developing a character that's the divine character. I mean, I couldn't have wanted a better way to finish my career, to be honest.
Well, you're obviously an advocate for Heritage College.
No question about it. Yeah, no question. Look, I mean, every family has to make choices,
Yeah.
about what's best for their families, and I get that. And it has to do with location, where you're located, travel time has got to do with all sorts of things. But look, all I can say is that my personal experience was absolutely fantastic. My two granddaughters go to Heritage Adelaide, and well, it's the staff have just been so good with them, and they're doing so wonderfully well. So very blessed.
Well, that's a great recommendation and a great environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to pick up on your comments about Bible study and how you found the Bible study was cool, because that's a great segue into what we're talking about. The book's called Asa the Healer, and before I get into the details, I thought the book would be about 3 pages long, because I'm thinking, well, how much is there to say about Asa? And I got the book and it was 95 pages long, and I've just been staggered actually with the amount of content, and I've been fascinated by what I've been reading. So congratulations on the book. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, look, I think he's a fantastic character. Actually, it's really interesting because I was exhorting somewhere away one day, and the reading for the day just happened to be that First of Kings 15. And I knew nothing about Asa. In fact, apart from Sunday school, I don't even remember having heard anyone talk about him.
Yeah, if you had have asked me, I wouldn't have been able to place him for you.
Yeah,
I've sort of heard of him. Guy had something wrong with his feet or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I was just reading the chapter, and I was just reading, God set up a lamp in Jerusalem. That's interesting. Why would he be doing that? And that's connected to who this next king's going to be, so that he's going to be established. That's interesting. Wonder what that's about. And then reading about this guy, he's amazing. And then suddenly realizing, actually, First Kings 15, that's only a little bit. There's all this stuff in Chronicles.
Yeah.
Wow, there's 3 chapters. I didn't even know this man existed practically. And there's 4 whole chapters of him in the Bible. And actually, he's referred to by Jeremiah the prophet generations later. And I suddenly started thinking, this could be interesting. And then I read about the fact that the prophet Hananiah comes to him. And this great king, this man, he said he did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord, in the eyes of Yahweh. Suddenly he spits the dummy, right?
Yeah.
And he absolutely chucks a fruity. And I just go, what is going on with this guy?
It's not what you're expecting, is it?
No, not at all. And he chucks him in prison, and then he starts beating up on the people. And yet then I read, and he was perfect all his days. And I'm going, I just can't get my head around it. So I ended up doing Excel on it at this visiting ecclesia. They thought it was amazing, which was great. I'm glad it resonated with them. And it was just all around this idea of the fact that sometimes there's moments in life which trigger memory. He was brought up in this environment of warfare and bloodshed, his grandfather and his father, their whole reigns were about warring against the northern, because the split had just happened. Right? It only happened, shortly before he became king, a couple of decades, basically. And all that period of time.
Well, he's the grandson of Rehoboam, isn't he? So, yep.
That's right. So there's not a lot, of time that's passed between Solomon having this united kingdom and now Asa being in this southern kingdom that's almost been shredded of all humanity, and is fallen into a heap. It's basically worn torn. And he's grown up in that, and he's looking back at his father David, who had a heart like God's. He's gone back to his father Solomon, who was a man of peace, as it were, peaceable. And he wants that. He wants that back again. He wants that for his nation. And he spends all this time, building up the nation for peace, for peace, for peace. And then after, this huge army of Egyptians come down, after all these things, they have this huge victory. They clean the land. Everything's great. And he goes and makes an alliance with Syria against the north. And along comes this prophet and says, now you'll have war all your days. And it's like, what a waste of my time. Why have I done all this? And it's just fascinating looking at that.
Yeah, okay. So you think his rebellion was triggered by the fact that he was told that he would have war all his days?
Yeah. It's like, hang on, that's what my father and my grandfather did, who were unrighteous, who were wicked men. And I've done nothing but serve God. And suddenly it's like the rug's been pulled out from me. And I just found that fascinating because we grow up in an environment, or I don't know about you, Steve, but when I was younger, I definitely grew up with the feeling like if you did the right thing, everything will go right.
Right.
It'll be fine. Everything will come up roses. And I'm not sure why I thought that way. Maybe it was just my experiences were pretty good as a kid, and growing up as a young person, a young baptized brother and teacher girl, that was pretty good. So sometimes it's not till adversity comes that you realize how important it is, and how you need those challenges, and how merciful God is in providing those challenges. And we've all had them in different forms, and life isn't a bed of roses. And God doesn't just let you waltz through life happily, because he wants you to develop his character. And that only comes through testing and trial and things going wrong, and you responding like he'd respond to those things. And I think that really struck me with Asa, that he struggled with that, and yet despite that, God could say, you were perfect. You did what was good and right in my sight. And he's only one of three that's told good and right. There's only 3 kings of Judah, right? Discounting the north completely, because none of them were good.
So I'm going to take a guess here. I'm going to say Jehoshaphat and Hezekiah?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. So his son Jehoshaphat, how amazing. It's really only the strongest father-son apart from David and Solomon,
right,
in the kings. Some kings did have a son who followed well, but not to the level of those two.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable. And then of course, Hezekiah was, can I say freak? I'm not sure that's a good thing to say, but he was a freak.
He was unique.
He was absolutely amazing. Now, in fact, just so you know, I've got a book currently being edited in the process, so on Hezekiah. So keeping a bit of an eye out for that one.
You'll hear it first here on Wilderness Conversations.
Yeah, first time. Yeah, so I just heard back from CSSS that it's at the stage for editing. So yeah, remarkable. Those 3 kings, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and of course Josiah. He did what was right. So those 4 are the great 4 reformers, which I comment on in the book. Yeah.
Let's go through a little bit of the detail. You've given a great summary. He came to power 20 years after Rehoboam, 20 years after the division of the land. So Rehoboam reigned for 17 years. His father, Abijah, who was a horror, reigned for about 3 years. And then there was Asa, as you say, sort of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Why do you think, where did this man come from, given the background and his parents and his grandparents?
Yeah. Well, clearly he didn't get a lot of guidance from his grandfather or his father. That they were too busy, caught up with all the antagonism with their brethren in the north. Really sad to grow up in an environment of conflict of brethren. So he didn't get that, but clearly somewhere something stuck. I think the fact that there's three prophets associated with his reign, that you've got Azariah, Hananiah, you've probably got Ahijah in there as well. You've got those sort of men who I think God worked through. So there was probably he probably had a mother who couldn't stand up against the king and his grandfather, the king before. But she wanted to try to keep, bring some positive influence. And we're not told this in the record. This is purely speculation, but I think reading between the lines, someone had to bring him into contact.
There was an influence there somewhere.
I think she couldn't possibly do it herself. We're not told anything about her. We're told about his grandma, Maacah, shocker.
Well, let's talk about her for a second, because that's an interesting aside, yeah. So he actually ended up removing her.
Absolutely. I mean, she's called the Queen Mother, and it's actually Gemara. It's a term of authority that she's been given. She's set herself up as the Queen Mother, if you like, and it's clear from that term that she was the dominant force in the house, certainly from Rehoboam and Ammon. So she was Ammon's mum and Asa's grandmother. She had a huge impact. She was the one. She was an Ammonitess, right? So she's brought in a lot of. And Rehoboam's wife was an Ammonitess, and Maacah continued that. Into the kingdom, bringing that idolatry and that way of worship, and it took a strong man to stand up to his grandmother, who was clearly a huge influence in the nation.
Yeah.
To say, no, sorry, this isn't okay. And it's a tough thing to stand up against family, when it comes to doing the right thing. And you've got to make that choice. Am I just got to go along with it because she's grandma, or am I going to make a stand for God? And that's a decision we have to make, quite often in life around things. Is it what's easier because it's convenient, it keeps people happy, or is it right? And Asa decided to do what was right and good. So I think his mum, probably got those prophets around him. Probably there was still a remnant in Judah, clearly, because the nation responded to Asa when he decided to turn things up and declare this a nation. So there was a remnant there, I think. And I can imagine him as a 10, 12-year-old beginning to write out the law, and starting to get heads and tails around it, because there's this repetition of him following in the footsteps of his father, David.
Right.
All right. So he's definitely picking up on this heritage, which was in his family, of this righteous one who followed the law, and David patterned a lot of his kingdom on those things which were structured in the law of Moses. Not that David was about keeping law. We know that through his life, he was actually learning that grace was there within law if you could find it. And I think Asa picked up on that, and he had people around him who were just instructed, just saying, what do you reckon about this, Asa? How would you respond in this situation? And, look at how Moses handled that. And look at how David did that. And look at David's words there in this psalm that he wrote. I just think they had those conversations.
Well, he certainly started off in the right way, doesn't he? Sort of almost like a starting gun out of the blocks. He cleanses the land, and sort of amazing start.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's because of that phrase that I mentioned earlier, that God set up a lamp for him. And it's really that during the reign of his father, Abijah, there, God worked that there was going to be something there for Asa to draw on. He was going to protect the kingdom from the north, to preserve it, and he gave Abijah a great victory, which really Abijah didn't deserve. But I think this setting up a lamp was just so important. God was there guiding those conversations, that he'd be ready, so that when he came to the throne, it was right. What are we going to do? And he didn't hang around. He said, this has to happen now. And so he got those leaders that I think he'd been working on. He didn't wait for his father to die and then start preparing people. He'd already prepared people. When his father died, he cleaned out the cabinet, put his men in there that he'd been working with for how many years, who knows, and then they just went for it. And they got the name, and the people responded to that fervency and that example, much like how the people leaned on Hezekiah. They leaned on Asa, and they took his example and they worked with it. And they went throughout Judah and Jerusalem to start with, cleansing out all those idols that had come in during his father's reign. And you got to get rid of that stuff out of your life. And we know what they are. It's different things for different people. But you got to get rid of that stuff.
I might just read out of 2 Chronicles 14, where he's actually quoted, and he says, "Let us rebuild these cities and surround them with walls and towers and gates and bolts. The land is still before our face, because we have sought Yahweh Elohim. We have sought him, and he has given us rest from out of the places around about." So there seemed to be this connection of ideas where you cleanse the land, that then brings peace, and then that's not a time for sitting around doing nothing now. So now he then rebuilds the cities and rebuilds the walls.
That's right. So because they got rid of the idols and that from Jerusalem and Judah, Yahweh blesses them with peace, and they get 10 years of peace. And during this 10-year period, they're going about, rebuilding, the land. And they're rebuilding the fortress cities of Solomon and of Rehoboam. They're rebuilding all those protective things because, we need those walls to protect us from what's without. Because the fiery darts of the wicked, as Paul says, they keep coming in, and we've got to have that weaponry to protect us. And he's doing that in the nation, and he's preparing them, not just physically, obviously building up, but also preparing their minds to come back to the worship of Yahweh. That's why you're suddenly finding that there's people from the northern tribes coming down to Judah to come to worship, because they're seeing what's happening down south. And this is the first time this happens, right? It's still early on, obviously. But you always think of Hezekiah, messengers going up to the north and them coming down, and you think about, that sort of thing. But Asa's the first. And I think Hezekiah looks back to Asa as a bit of a role model around that. Because he's establishing a spiritual environment where people with spiritual minds want to come.
And it looks like his territory actually encroaches into the area of Ephraim and Manasseh as well.
That's right. Because the record actually, it just says that those that had fallen to him, it's like he'd been, so there was after the big battle with the Egyptians, which we'll probably get to, Steve, he's given another 10 years of peace, reading between the lines in the record. So during that 10 years of peace again, it seems as if he's actively encouraging people coming down from the north.
Yeah.
And this is what then, causes this animosity between him and Baasha in the north. Because it says there's war all their days. But if we're actually leaving it till that time when he goes to Assyria, that's like 10, 12 years after Baasha's already been on the throne.
Yep.
So how can there be this antagonism all their days? I think it was this, he's actively encouraging people coming down. And they fell to him, it says. They fall to him. They come to him because they don't want to be part of that northern dynasty of idolatry and of false worship.
It's very encouraging, isn't it? If here's a man who's doing the right thing, worshipping Yahweh, encouraging others to do so, and it's becoming a contagion. Others want to be involved, and they want to be part of this.
And that's it. And you cannot force people to change, Steve. Right? This is one of the things we learn through experiences, that you can't force people to change. The only way that you could change people is by changing yourself and how you interact with them. And the way you change interactions with people then changes their perception of you and how they want to work with you. And that's how people change. You got to draw them alongside. This idea of paraclesis, coming alongside to exhort, I think is really, really powerful. And, look, we want people to get better, don't we? We all know we're sinful and that we naturally are prone to sin and turn away from God. And that's our natural state. And the only way to overcome that is by developing his thinking, to develop the thinking of the mind of Christ so that we could change the way we respond. And that includes how we respond to each other. And so the more that we respond to each other in a Christ-like, godly manner, the more likely we're going to engender that for other people. And that's what he's doing. He's showing this Christ mind in the way he's working with people, saying, "Come on down, we've got the true worship here. We've got the feasts up and running. Come on down to Passover. That sort of thing. You come with your family.
Cool.
You're all there together. And you're around the Word of God, and this is what he's doing. He's calling people down to the worship."
And so he builds up the fortifications, and you make an interesting observation around the size of the army which he built,
Yes.
Which was significant.
Yeah, that's right.
580,000 fighting men.
Yeah. So when you look at how it starts in the reign of Rehoboam, there's 180,000, and Jeroboam's got 800,000.
Yeah.
Right. So this huge disparity. And suddenly Abijah's got 400,000. Well, you'd expect that growth because it's all about war. It's all about bloodshed. That's his focus. But by the time you get to Asa, you got 580,000. And Jehoshaphat's got over 1 million. So the work of Asa prepared for the army of Jehoshaphat to be bigger than that huge Egyptian army that came into the land of 1 million people. And yet, in contrast, Ahab, the record says he's just got 2 little flocks.
Yeah.
So they diminished from 800,000 to what, 8,000? Who knows how many?
Yeah.
A small number. Whereas this army of Judah, and it's really just a symbol of the spiritual warfare which is going on, and God strengthening that nation spiritually. So yes, there's a physical army, but there's more with us than with them. And it's really this spiritual army that's being developed in the nation, really.
And all of that was preparation for the time that was to come. So you've already mentioned it was 10 years of peace, which implies there's something coming.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned that, times can be good, but there's going to be times that come where trouble is coming. We'll talk about who they are. We'll call them Egypt for now, but I'll get you to elaborate a little bit on that in a second. But what I noticed was there's 580 fighting men, and there's almost a contrast between the Egyptians, which are larger, but also have chariots. And it's interesting that no horses and chariots are mentioned in Judah because they were not to multiply.
No, that's
horses.
right. So of course, Solomon did have horses, but it seems like Asa has gone back to the law. Like I said, I think he read the law. I think he read Deuteronomy. I think he knew those things before he became king. And it's almost as if he made a decision. I'm going to follow Yahweh, and that's even the little things.
Yep.
I'm not going to focus on the chariots and the horses. I'm going to get these fighting men who are faithful ministers before God. And I think he does that very deliberately. And so it's not a focus on the strength of man. And that comes out really, really powerfully in this story when the Zerah, the Ethiopian, invades the land. And of course, what's really interesting at this period of time in history is that the 22nd dynasty of the pharaohs was actually a Cushite dynasty.
So we're talking about land sort of further to the south of modern-day Egypt.
Yeah, so modern-day Sudan.
Yep.
Right, is the area of ancient Cush. Absolutely. So there's this whole prophetic symbolism in this battle of this, Northern Confederacy, as it were, even though it's coming from the south. It's really symbolic of this Northern Confederacy, which is connected with Libya and Cush in the south, Sudan, Ethiopia.
It's almost exactly the same region.
It's the same region. And so you've got this typical enemy coming in the land of these traditional enemies, if you like. So what's interesting is that this Zerah is probably a Zorkon the first, looking at the timing. We can't confirm that, but...
Well, you're the history teacher, so we'll take your word for it.
Well, looking at the history, that certainly seems to be the case. And his family was not just Cushite. His family had also come from Libya. And so when we read about this great army, it talks about Egyptians because we know that the Cushites it was a Cushite dynasty in control of Egypt. So you've got Upper, which is down here. The lower part is actually Upper Egypt, and Lower Egypt up here in the north. They're now combined in the control of this Cushite dynasty who've got Libyan background. So you've got the Egyptians, and then you've got other mentioned, of course, the Cushites, and later on, in Chronicles 15, it mentions the Libyans. And it makes sense because of that family. That's where they came from. And this huge army, it's the biggest army ever recorded in Scripture coming against Israel. And it's the greatest victory that Israel has ever won outside of the land. Of course, you got Hezekiah's victory over the Assyrians, but that was a different story again. Of course, the angel bringing that victory. But there's this huge army, and Asa goes down there with half the size. All right. So, on a fleshly perspective, that's not real good odds, Steve.
Yeah.
Right. You're not looking for a win there, I don't think. You're going to be overwhelmed. But he had no thought of that. His thought simply was that Yahweh would be with him. That was it. Simple as that. You might just be noting 2 Chronicles 14, verse 11.
I was just looking at it because it's actually says even more than that. He says,
it's incredible, isn't
Yahweh, it is nothing with you to help
That's right.
between many, those with many with no power. So he says,
right.
He says, like, this is nothing for you, God.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary prayer.
What? I don't know what it's like to look at an army of 1 million people. I don't even know what that looks like. I've seen pictures of when the Pope is there in the Vatican, and there's all those crowds of people. I've seen pictures of mass demonstrations and that sort of thing, but none of those reach 1 million people. I don't even know what that would look like, Steve. And here's this man, this king. He's had this time of peace, and now the test comes. How are you going to respond, Asa? Who gave you this peace? And why did it come? It came because you trusted in me, says God, and you got rid of that idolatry. Who are you going to trust in? You're going to still trust in me now when the chips are down, when it's really obvious that there's no way out for you here? When everything seems to be going wrong in our life, Steve, it's really easy to jump around like a chook with its head cut off, trying to solve our own problems, pretty poorly most of the time in my experience, from talking for myself. But when the chips are down, your faith is revealed when you go to God. I can't do anything, but I know you can. And I trust you. I trust you that you'll do something that I can't. And Asa's looking at this huge army, the biggest army in history against the land. And he goes, you can do it. I believe you. And because he believed, it happened. It's staggering, Steve, isn't it? And it's a real testament to the power of faith. And it's such a simple thing to say, just believe, just believe. And I guess like that man whose son would throw himself in the fire and throw him into the water, all we can say is, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief.
Well, the story could finish there, but of course we've only just started.
That's right.
It's an amazing story. So
it is an amazing story.
He comes back from the victory. And again, I'm amazed by the next event because you think, well, that's all good, happy days. But actually the prophet who we are introduced to gives him a really peculiar message, I thought.
Yeah.
And it's almost, let's have a look at what the message is.
Yeah, so Azariah, the son of Oded, comes, doesn't he?
Yes. And he says, hear, Asa, all Judah and Benjamin, Yahweh is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you abandon him, he will abandon you. Well, this comes after he's just demonstrated, the highest form of faith, etc., etc.
Surely he had been seeking him.
Yeah.
That's how he'd been found.
So why the message?
So you know what? I think, Steve, what the Father does throughout our lives is he gives us different periods, all right? And I think there's a foreboding in this. It's like you pass this test, but that's not the end. There's going to be more tests, Asa. And when those tests come, I want you to remember what happened here at this battle. I think that's what's going on. And the Father's saying, yeah, that was great. This is a journey of endurance. It's a race of endurance.
It's not over yet.
It's not a 100-meter sprint. It's not like, yep, been there, done that. I did it in 10 seconds. I finished. This is a life journey. And Steve, you and I have been on this life journey for a little while now and know what that's like. And it's full of ups and downs. It's like God saying to Asa, yeah, that was great, but it's only the start still. You've still got a long way to go. And there's going to be more things that happen. So don't forget, keep on seeking. It's like what the Lord said on the Discourse on the Mount: seek and you'll find, knock, etc. And the Greek is keep on seeking,
Right.
keep on knocking. It's not something you can do once off. It's not like, well, God's seen me be faithful now, he owes me.
Yeah.
It's not how life works.
And indeed, he was only 10 years into what turned out to be a 41-year reign.
That's right.
And another interesting thing happens because as a result of this prophecy, we're told that he then cleanses the land. He's already done that.
What I think that the record's saying here is that his work was basically in Jerusalem and the surrounding area of close to the Judean hills, if you like. I think what happens now is that this extends further and into those areas in the northern tribes that had come to him, in those parts north of the border. So he's now going a wider reach. Of course, I think it's highly possible that some of the people did go back to idolatry because you don't just change your ways overnight.
Yep.
I mean, growing up, I loved football, right? Loved it. Even to this day, when the footy comes on, I still keep a bit of an ear open and I still have a bit of a check of this. It's always those sort of things.
Crows or Port?
Don't get me started, mate. You just got to crows. You just got to be mindful of where your mind is at key moments in life and what you value. Nothing wrong with enjoying sport. I enjoy sport. I played a lot of sport as a kid, but I had to learn that there's things that are more important than sport. And that was something my parents taught me. To their credit, my mum and dad sort of had a few words and said, well, how about we start doing some of this? And they got me refocused. And I think this is life. These things, idols come back into our lives. And we just got to be mindful of it,
So it's a constant process of cleansing, isn't it?
That's right. Not that, watching a game of footy or listening to some footy is necessarily a terrible, terrible thing. I'm not saying that at all. But we've just got to be mindful about where our value is and where we place value.
So 10 years of peace while he built up the cities, this big battle with the Southern Army, and then it looks like there's another period of peace. Yeah. And then we're actually given a timeline, which is a bit tricky, which we might skip over that just for the moment.
Yeah, look, have a look in the book. It explains it because it is a bit of a trick because there's a bit of question over some of the dating. Yeah. And I do answer some of that in the book, but again,
hard to be sure.
It's tricky. But looking at the process, just looking at how his life is structured, the way I've explained in the book, I think makes sense. I don't know what you found, but I think it makes sense. And it certainly fits in with all the other chronologies of the other kings, which wouldn't be the case without that modifications that's in the book. So
we're talking about I think it was the 26th year of his reign.
Yeah. So the Masoretic text sort of says in the 35th year and the 36th year, but there are other texts which say the 25th and the 26th year, and there is the suggestion that some scribes actually miscribed the dates, and that I think that has to be the case because Baasha dies in Asa's 26th year. So the only way it can work is if it's the 25th and 26th year. Some explanations go back to, it's the 25th and 26th year from the division of the kingdom. That doesn't fit either. So I don't think that's the case. But yeah, rather than getting stuck onto that.
Well, it's interesting because it puts this event right at the end of Baasha's life. And of course, for those who haven't connected, Baasha's the northern king of Israel. And he decides to come down into Judah and start, probably, we talked about it before, Judah's having an influence and they're starting to change.
I've got to stop this. Yeah. I've got to stop this drain of people from the north. They're heading south. They're connecting to Asa, and he wasn't looking at that as a spiritual thing. He's looking at that as a political, financial sort of, a sociological thing.
And then Asa does something completely unexpected.
Between First Chronicles 15 and 16, it's like suddenly a different person is in the record. You've got this amazing man of faith in chapters 14 and 15. Just incredible. And when you read, he did what was good and right. He was perfect all his days. Look, you could see it there. But then in chapter 16, it's like it's a character change.
So just to be clear, for those who don't know, he decides not to pray to Yahweh like he did before.
That's right. He goes and seeks aid from Syria.
Yeah.
He's a traditional enemy. He goes and seeks it becomes certainly a traditional
And
enemy.
goes and robs the temple to pay for it.
That's right. So he robs the temple and he sends a payment, tribute up to the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad. And he says, look, come and help me against Israel. It is so unlike him. But I think this is why. Here's this great army of Cushite Egyptian Libyans, Gentiles, if you like, to the Jewish mind, right? And there's a huge gulf between Jew and Gentile in the Jewish mind. That's easy. Oh, that's right. They're idolatrous heathens, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's clear where God stands.
Really clear. But this kingdom in the north, they're my brothers. Only 20 years before, we were one nation. Well, actually,
20 plus 15 or whatever it is, yeah.
35 years now.
Yeah.
But, we're brothers. And it just goes to show sometimes, Steve, conflict with brothers is far more problematic than facing up against the world sometimes. And we've seen that in ecclesial life, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. I was wondering whether he thought he couldn't pray to God because they're God's people as well. So God wasn't going to intervene.
That's right.
He wouldn't
We're
choose
all
one.
people. That's right. So I'm going to have to solve this myself, he starts thinking. And of course, that's when the mind of the flesh kicks in. And instead of thinking with the mind of the spirit, and this is the great battle which we're going through, Steve, Romans 7, that Paul so beautifully outlines for us. There's this battle going on all the time because our natural mind is still there. And we're developing this spiritual mind to overwhelm it over time. But this battle keeps on happening in our mind, in our thinking. And here's Asa, this is going full bore. And unfortunately, at this moment, the carnal mind's winning, right? He's thinking of flesh. How do I get out of this? How do I solve this? I, me. What, and this is what he comes up with. And we go and look at it, we say, what are you thinking? But in his head, it makes sense. And sometimes sin in our head makes sense. And we justify it. It's easier, or it's more convenient, or it's just what we want to do, Steve. And we come up with all the reasons for it. And we go ahead and aren't we so thankful that we have a merciful, loving Father and a faithful high priest who's compassionate, who knows us better than we know ourselves, who could still work with us in those moments.
I sort of thought that with this story as well, because if God gave up on Asa, he would just let him go. But he doesn't. He sends a prophet.
No, that's right.
And God wouldn't do that if he didn't care about what was going on, and he didn't care about Asa. So he sends another prophet, a new prophet, which I don't think we've met before.
No. So he comes.
So it's Hanani.
And he basically, he tells him, look, I'm sorry, Asa, you have just made a mess of this. You've done the wrong thing.
You've not leaned upon Yahweh your God, therefore the army of the king of Assyria slipped away from out of your hand.
That's right. He's reminding him to go back. You remember when you came up against that Cushite Egyptian Libyan force. It was huge. And yet you were given the victory. It wasn't you who did it, Asa. The record clearly says, and the Lord, Yahweh, was the one who defeated that host. And he gave that to you. And when you trusted on him, then he was with you. But you haven't trusted on him. And so this Syrian kingdom, you know what, Asa? He would have fallen to your hand if you trusted in me. Just like the Egyptians. He would have come against you, and you would have destroyed him. You would have had the victory. But he slipped out of your hand now, and now you're going to have all this problem, all this issue. And this is where he says that incredible thing, because he says in 2 Chronicles 16, verses 8 to 9 there, after reminding him about the Cushites and the Libyans, he says, for the eyes of Yahweh go to and fro in all the earth. He sees everything. He sees into your heart, Asa. All right, he sees everything. Being strong with them whose heart is complete towards him. That's the same phrase used of him of Asa himself when God said, and his heart was complete. He was complete.
I thought of David as well.
And of David,
Yeah.
right? And in this, your heart wasn't complete. Upon this, you have been foolish, and from now on, you will have wars. And like we mentioned right at the start, snap. No, it's not justifying his behavior at all, Steve, right? We can't justify our, by excuses when we sin against God, but you can understand it,
Yeah.
It's like, hang on, I've just made one mistake, and bam, I'm going to be no different to my father and grandfather, who were evil men.
And God's not doing what I expected.
Yeah, that's right. And I just thought, because of what I'd done, God owed me. No, God doesn't owe us, Steve. He never has owed us. He never owes us.
And he responded very badly.
He did. Sadly, he did. Yep. So he took the prophet, he threw him in the stocks, because the actual word means to be bent. No, bent double. So he's got his hands up here, his feet sticking out like those old stocks. Who knows? People might have even thrown the rotten tomatoes at him and all the old fruit, like they used to do, medieval England.
It would have been very unpleasant, that's for sure.
It would, just nasty
And there's
stuff.
no record of him coming out of that either.
No, there isn't. I presume that he did at the end. I think that there was a change, but certainly there's no record of that happening. And not only that, he starts beating up the people. He starts imprisoning people who are saying, Asa, this isn't you.
Yeah, because there's probably faithful people.
That's right.
Speaking up.
Absolutely. They're shocked. They're shocked to see their king like that. And some of his faithful leaders would have gone, Asa, I reckon you're making some bad choices here, but he didn't want to listen to that. Didn't want to listen to that.
And then we know how he ends up. He ends up with a man diseased in the feet. Interesting that actually doesn't come. There's another few years before that happens.
Yeah, there is. And again, I think God's giving him time, like he gave with the 10 years of peace, and then the second 10 years of peace. He's given him another lot of time. And this is God's faithfulness and his mercy. He gives us time to hear the voice, still small voice, to hear it and to go, oh, I've made a muck of this. Because God, this is the staggering thing of our God. He is forgiving. Mercy rejoices against judgment. And he rejoices in his children when they can go, boy, I made a blue of that. I'm so sorry. I've impacted on your honor, your righteousness, your glory. I've fallen short of that. I'm going to make amends to you. I'm going to make amends to those people who have harmed, I've done damage to. I'm going to seek them out. I'm going to try to do the right thing with them. That's what God wants to see. And Asa didn't get to that point. And so right at the end, the healer, Asa, the healer, is struck in the feet. This terrible disease, probably a form of very acute gout. I've had a bit of gout. Unfortunately, I get it from my dad. It is nasty. Literally, when I have a bad bout of it, I cannot walk. I literally cannot walk. It is that bad. So I can understand him, really in agony, because of this thing. But this was not, in a sense, a last-ditch effort, I guess, on behalf of God to say, wake up, learn what's happening through this. And I think the inference here, when you look at the genealogies, in the kings of Judah, there's a lot of co-regencies.
Yep.
Over the last 30 years, I've spent a lot of time doing this, particularly with Hezekiah. The only way to understand the reign of Hezekiah is with co-regencies.
Right, and so the same thing, there's a crossover between Asa and Jehoshaphat.
There's a crossover here. So Jehoshaphat, I believe, had grown up in some of the good times, and he'd seen his father's good works, and I think he was already being taught in the law. He was being already instructed and guided. And at the end of his father's reign, suddenly he sees this almost split personality come out. He sees it, he recognizes it, and I can see him working in the background, trying to just say, Dad, come on, let's get back to the old ways. You remember how we were when we did this? You remember when you did that? And I think Asa gets to the point where I just can't do this, son. I need you to step in. And Jehoshaphat does. He begins his co-regency. He'd already started his co-regency by that point. And he says, right, I'm going to take over, Dad, but I want you to be with me. I want to work with you. And here Asa sees Jehoshaphat's response, sees the way he goes about working with the people. It wouldn't surprise me at all, even though we're not told that Jehoshaphat released Hananiah. He released those people that Asa had been imprisoned. And I think there's an inference that the nation saw that Asa had changed in his burial. Because only 3 years later, 2.5 years later, he is given the biggest burial since the times of David and Solomon. And they're bringing him into the sepulchres of his fathers. And that just doesn't happen for a king that you despise or you. And I think there's this inference, and there's also these allusions to the Lord's burial. You know, the amount of spices that are mentioned in Chronicles and in Kings, incredible amount. A king's fortune worth to anoint the whole, and the body would have been literally dripping. All the grave clothes would have been literally dripping in this. It was so much. And this is what's being brought to this King Asa at the end of his life and this is why I think when God looked back at his life, he could say he was complete all his days. He was perfect all his days. Not because he didn't make mistakes, because he did. He made some shockers in those last years. Not because he wasn't punished for them, because he was punished for them, but because at the end of his life, he said, I got it wrong. And reading between the lines, I think the inference is there that the people recognize that and they forgave him for it. And they gave him the biggest funeral, almost imaginable. And he's there buried with David and with Solomon in the sepulchres of his father.
It's an extraordinary story. The book is fantastic. I'm recommending it to everybody.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, putting all those studies together. Yeah.
And we've just scratched the surface. So you've done a great job at expanding ideas. There's types of Christ, which are really interesting. A lot of genealogies, a lot of timelines and comparisons and maps and all sorts of things.
I think you can see the historian coming by writing. I just like knowing where things are.
But actually, you read the book and it's not just about Asa, because you're getting a bit of understanding about Rehoboam and Abijah and Jehoshaphat and what's going on in Israel.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot more in the book and there's a lot more going on.
And to be honest, I'd love to get to Jehoshaphat at some point.
Yeah.
Pull stuff together on him. And because I've got, like I mentioned, I've got Hezekiah coming out soon. And who knows, I might get to Jehoshaphat, I might not. I don't know what God's got in plan for me and how long we've got till the Lord's return. But
a great goal. Perhaps just before you finish, what's the takeaway message for us?
Takeaway is, personally, for me, the one thing that just blew me away, God is always there. We're the ones that leave. He never leaves.
Right.
He's always present. He's always watching. He always knows, and he's always there for us. He is that father who saw the prodigal son afar off, and he rushes out to him and he pulls us into his arms. And for me, Asa's the story of a great man, an incredible king, a very faithful man who did what was good and right, but who went astray on a number of occasions and who God never gave up on. And who in the end, it would seem to me at least, who acknowledged his failure. And that when we do that, Steve, it doesn't matter how bad things have been, how poor our choices have been at life, if we come back to God and say, you were right, God, I was wrong, I'm sorry, then as John says in 1 John, we are without sin.
Yep.
Now, I don't mean we're not sinners. Of course we are. We sin every day. But in Christ Jesus, through forgiveness, John says we can be like him without sin. That is a staggering principle. And it's only when we say, well, I don't care. I don't think God's interested. I'm too bad. God couldn't forgive me.
Yep.
Or I don't really care what God thinks. Well, then that's us. That's us taking ourselves away from God. That's us stopping God from doing what he can in his unlimited power. And I'll never forget, Steve, my father once saying many, many years ago, did you know that there's something God can't do? And as a young person, I was sitting there saying, Dad, what are you saying? Don't you know that God's all powerful? But he's right. There's one thing he can't do. He can't save us from ourselves if we don't let him. But if we let God work in our life, then no matter what we've done, if we turn to him in faith, he will be faithful to us, Steve. And we can have an absolute guarantee that if we put our life into his hands and we do everything we can to live according to what he has asked of us, to try to be like him and his son, then, as the Lord said, it is the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom.
Graeme, thank you very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
A pleasure, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.